Okay, today we're unraveling a mystery that is 2,000 years old, and honestly, it's absolutely baffled historians and scientists for over a century. I'm so incredibly thrilled to share this explainer with you, because we are looking at an artifact that, well, it simply shouldn't exist. We're talking about a story full of deadly storms, lost treasure, mind-bending ancient math, and a piece of tech so far ahead of its time, it literally feels like it dropped straight out of a time machine.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because right off the bat, we're faced with a serious, mind-bending paradox. What if the ancient Greeks built a highly sophisticated, functioning analog computer 2 millennia ago? I mean, for decades, historians completely believed that complex mechanical gears just weren't a thing until the clockwork of 14th century Europe. So to figure out how this impossible machine actually came to light, we've got to travel back to the dawn of the 20th century, to a seriously treacherous stretch of sea.
Section 1. The Shipwreck of Antikythera, a deadly discovery in 1900. Our story starts in the spring of that year with a crew of Greek sponge divers from the island of Symi. They got caught in this massive, violent storm, so their captain, Dimitrios Kondos, forced them to anchor near a tiny, super rocky island called Antikythera. Now this area, it was a notorious ship graveyard. Once the storm finally passed, they sent a young diver down about 50 meters, so roughly 160 feet, just to see if there were any sponges around. But what he found instead was straight out of a nightmare.
When they hauled that diver, Elias Stidiatis, back to the surface, he was literally shaking with terror. He told his captain he'd just seen a, quote, heap of dead, naked people down there. Naturally, the captain thought Elias was just hallucinating from nitrogen narcosis. But he wasn't. Elias had actually just stumbled onto a Roman cargo ship that sank way back around 60 BCE. And those dead bodies? They were actually these spectacular, life-sized bronze and marble statues perfectly preserved in the deep, freezing water. But, as we're going to see, getting them out of the water would exact a truly terrible toll.
You have to remember, this was basically the very first underwater archaeological excavation in history, and the stakes were literally life and death. You've got guys working at 50 meters deep in these heavy canvas suits and copper helmets. They had absolutely no concept of decompression tables or safety stops, so nitrogen is just dissolving into their blood under that massive pressure. The tragic result? One diver died and 2 were permanently paralyzed from the waist down. The captain had to just pull the plug and halt the operation. Those divers only had a few precious minutes down on the seafloor to blindly grab whatever they could.
Moving on to an impossible bronze artifact, the forgotten lump of metal. So, amidst all those stunning marble horses, bronze warriors, and intricate glassware they hauled up in those frantic, deadly minutes, there was something else. Just a strange, highly corroded lump of green bronze and wood, maybe about the size of a shoebox. To anyone's untrained eye, it honestly just looked like a barnacle-covered rock. They tossed it into a crate, shipped it off to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and it sat there, completely ignored, for 2 whole years, while everyone else just fawned over the shiny statues.
Let's move to this timeline and see how this incredible mystery builds over a century of agonizingly slow revelations. In 1902, an archaeologist named Valerius Sties is walking past a crate, happens to look down at this lump, which had actually cracked open by then, and he spots precisely cut gear teeth. That single, totally accidental observation shattered the entire archaeological timeline. But it took until the 1970s for a physicist named Derek J. DeSola Price to take the very first 2D X-rays, which finally proved it was a complex astronomical device. Still, the real game-changing breakthrough, that didn't happen until 2005.
And the reason it took so long is that by the time modern researchers really began their deep dive, the original lump had splintered into 82 separate, incredibly fragile fragments. I mean, some of these pieces were literally the size of a fingernail. It became this maddening, insanely complex 3D jigsaw puzzle. And the hardest part? Researchers had to figure it all out without actually being able to touch or manipulate those super delicate internal components.
Which brings us to decoding the first computer, reading the hidden manual. To finally solve this 82-piece puzzle, a team led by Tony Freeth at University College London and Cardiff University brought in the big guns in 2005. We're talking an 8-ton prototype 3D microfocus X-ray CT scanner. This incredible piece of tech finally allowed them to peer right through the dense, 2,000-year-old marine corrosion without destroying the bronze itself. And what they saw pop up on those screens, it literally took their breath away.
Hidden deep inside those layers of bronze were thousands of tiny Greek letters, Some of them were less than 2 millimeters high. These inscriptions were a literal user's manual tucked right inside the device. It was text detailing exactly how the whole thing functioned, explaining the front and back dials and referencing the movements of celestial bodies. So suddenly, researchers weren't just taking wild guesses at what the gears did anymore. They were actually reading the ancient engineer's own personal instructions.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly dense this shoebox-sized computer really was. Look at this. On the front dial, you had pointers tracking the exact position of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the paths of all 5 planets visible to the naked eye. So Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Then on the back, you had these massive spiral dials calculating the 19-year Metonic calendar, plus predicting solar and lunar eclipses using the Babylonian Saros cycle. Oh, and it even had a smaller dial dedicated exclusively to tracking the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic and Olympic Games. The sheer amount of data here is just wild.
Next section. Gears of the cosmos, mathematics and bronze. Think about this for a second. To make all of those incredibly complex dials move in perfect sync with just a single turn of a crank handle on the side of a wooden box, the ancient Greeks literally had to turn abstract astronomical mathematics into physical bronze. They were quite literally building a mechanical universe. The level of mechanical engineering required to pull something like that off purely via analog technology, it is just absolute sheer awe.
Based on the very latest reconstructions by the UCL team, this device required a minimum of 69 interlocking, precisely cut triangular gears. And get this, all of these had to be hand-filed from flat sheets of bronze, then packed tightly into a space just 25 millimeters deep. They were operating with tolerances measured in tiny fractions of a millimeter. It's a total masterpiece of miniaturization. Honestly, we didn't think human beings were capable of making anything like this until the era of high-end Swiss watchmaking.
But here, right here, is where the genius truly shines. See, the Greeks knew that the moon doesn't just travel at a constant, steady speed across the sky. It actually speeds up and slows down because its orbit is elliptical. To recreate that variable motion physically, the builder used something called epicyclic gearing, which is basically gears mounted on top of other gears. They used this tiny, super clever pin and slot mechanism where one gear dragged another along, but slightly off-center. This brilliant little mechanical trick perfectly modeled the changing speed of the moon, a concept that was supposedly impossible for that era.
So the crucial point we need to take away here is this. The Antikythera Mechanism physically modeled the lunar anomaly using bronze gears. Historically speaking, we credit the great astronomer Johannes Kepler with mathematically describing elliptical orbits way later, in the 17th century. The ancient Greeks literally took Kepler's brilliant astronomical insights and built them into a functioning bronze machine 1700 years before Kepler was even born. Mind blown.
Which leads us to our next section. Who built the machine? The Archimedes connection. This brings us to a massive, glaring historical question. Who on Earth could have actually built this thing? I mean, a machine this intensely complex doesn't just spring out of nowhere, yet this exact level of technological mastery completely vanished from human history for over 1,000 years.
Well, we do have a few prime suspects for who might have pulled this off. Interestingly, the Roman statesman Cicero actually wrote about seeing very similar geared planetary models. He specifically mentions devices built by the legendary mathematician Archimedes, and later on, the philosopher Posidonius on the island of Rhodes. There's also a really strong link to the astronomer Hipparchus, because he's the guy who developed the specific theory of the moon's motion that the mechanism actually uses. Most experts today speculate that Archimedes himself may have founded the actual mechanical tradition that eventually gave us the Antikythera mechanism. Moving to our last section, Rewriting Human History, the 2024 discovery. Now, for well over a century, archaeologists just naturally assumed that the Antikythera mechanism was a unique anomaly, just a one-off creation made by some solitary genius that tragically got lost at sea. But as we've learned, those first sponge divers back in 1900 had very, very little time to explore. They were rushing for their lives. So, what if they missed something?
Researchers have basically debated 4 main possibilities for why this machine is the only one we've ever found. Number 1, it really was just a one-of-a-kind creation. Number 2, other machines did exist, but they were eventually melted down by people just wanting to recycle the highly valuable bronze. 3, there are others sitting totally unclassified in dusty museum storerooms right now, just like this one did for 2 years. Or 4, and honestly this is the most tantalizing idea, that incredibly wealthy Roman cargo ship at Antikythera was actually carrying more than one of these devices.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this story is far from over. It is actively unfolding right now.
In 2024, marine archaeologists went back to the waters off Antikythera and found a completely untouched second debris field, totally separated from the main wreck. We are talking about a patch of seafloor that no one had excavated for 124 years. And they brought up these heavily corroded, unidentified bronze fragments that do not match the statues or the coins. Right now, as we speak, those mysterious objects are sitting in labs in Geneva and Athens just waiting for their X-ray scans.
The implications here are absolutely staggering. As the great science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke once said, if the Greeks had recognized what they'd invented, they could have got to the moon within 300 years. The sheer existence of the Antikythera Mechanism proves that the ancient world possessed a highly specialized, brilliant class of engineers. An entire, booming branch of mechanical science was seemingly erased from history, costing humanity over a millennium of technological progress.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. We've built this entire narrative of human technological progress, assuming the Antikythera Mechanism was completely alone. But if those first brave sponge divers missed a massive debris field that lay hidden in the deep for over a century, what other impossible technology is still waiting for us down in the dark? Thank you so much for exploring this incredible ancient mystery with me in this explainer. Keep wondering, and I'll catch you next time.